Hey, it looked like the team call was running a little long, so I'll give a little extra time for people to switch over. Can everybody see the presentation okay? Sweet, thank you. All right, I think we've got most people here from the team, and we are 2 minutes after, so if you're late, we won't wait. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Ian Baum. I am a senior build engineer here at GitLab. Recently, I was tasked with writing a module for Terraform to make it easy for us to deploy a GitLab instance, and then Jason took that and ran with it to add runners to that. So I'm going to give a bit of a talk about Terraform in general, and then kind of go into how we used it to get everything ready. So the first question, obviously, is what is Terraform? Basically, Terraform is just a tool we can use to provision infrastructure. It's similar somewhat to configuration management, except it's much more lower level. So it can speak to a bunch of different providers. You can use Amazon, Google Cloud, or DigitalOcean, or someone like that, and you can spin up the different parts of your infrastructure you need to do, like spin up servers, spin up mess with DNS or firewalls, or create external IPs, things like that. You basically do all of this using code. It's a configuration language they've created specifically for Terraform. So you just define all the pieces you need, and then you run a command, and it will create all of them and give you the status. And after that, you can see what is up and what is down. When you make changes, it'll show you what you need to change, so you can kind of see what's going on. Also, it uses something called a state file. You can use that to share the state between team members. So say, you can spin up a new instance, and then you share that you have the state file that all the rest of your team can access, so they can also see what the current state is. So if they need to change things, then everything is saved in that state file so that everybody can then make sane changes without kind of like stepping on each other's feet. It is a somewhat, I don't know the correct word for the language. It is some kind of limiting, but once you get used to it, it makes sense. So I'll step into how does our Terraform module actually work. So if you look at the slide, on the left is the module we wrote. It's just a series of the provider defines what how you connect to the different provider you're going to use. And then you specify the instances you want to, or the resources you want to create for the specific application you're doing. So the resource I've included in the slide is for the actual GitLab instance. So you define the different attributes like count, name, machine type, network interface. And then when you run the Terraform apply, it will go through that, figure out what resources already exist and what need to be created or changed. On the right is the configuration file that's part of our module, and so this defines all the different variables that the resources need in order to kind of create there. And so the first one we have there is no default value. So what that ends up doing is telling the Terraform that the user has to provide that value. So when they run a Terraform apply, If they don't have that in their configuration, then Terraform will actually prompt them to provide a value for that variable. And the second variable, the data size there, we give it a default size. So if the user does not provide any sort of information for that, then Terraform will just use the default value. They don't have to do that. I'll provide a link at the end of the presentation to the repository for those who don't have it, but there's a lot more going on to this. I just kind of condensed it somewhat to give it some, good examples of what sort of things you can see when you were writing this. So from the user's point of view, this is all they need to do to actually spin up a GitLab instance in their own file. They specify they're using a module. They specify where to get the module from, and then they provide the different variables that, at the very least, this is a minimum amount for the most part. DNS name is not actually required, or DNS zone is not actually required. But this is a working example that I would use, and this is all you need to do to use Terraform to spin up a GitLab instance in Google Compute Engine. So you provide all that information. The data volume, I did keep that. We don't create that for you. The user does need to create that. If we put it as part of the Terraform resource, when they want to tear down their instance, it will delete the volume, which we're assuming is not always what the user wants to do. So, because the data volume is where they're going to store all their Git repositories, a database. So if there's an issue and you want to recreate your instance, we wanted to keep the data separate from what Terraform managed. So for now, that is something you do have to manually create. And there's directions in the repository on how to get the authentication file. And the config file is just a standard GitLab RB. Jason did update it recently, so it does pre-populate some information for you, but anything that's valid in GitLab RB, you can change in that. There are things you probably don't want to change, but we can get into that later if we need be. So the next step is you run Terraform get, and that will actually look in your module and see the source, and it will download the latest version. And it will, every time you run Terraform get, it will get it if it's not there, but if you don't tell it to update, it won't update. So it'll use whatever was checked out the last time you ran Terraform get. So if you run Terraform get, it sees it has something already, it will not go and check if there's a newer version available. You have to run Terraform get, I think, and dash update in order for it to check to see if there's any updates to the modules. The next command is Terraform plan. That's going to take a look at the current state of things. If there's a state file, it'll look at that, and it will kind of give you it gives you a checklist of everything it's going to want to do. So right now, since this was run against a completely bare instance that hadn't yet been provisioned, you usually see a lot of plus signs. So these are things it's going to add. If it was going to destroy anything, you would see a negative marker next to them. So just again, there's a lot more to this output, but it's showing that it's going to add an external IP address, and it's going to create a firewall with external ports 80, 443, and 22 open using the TCP protocol. So those are the ones that people need to use in order to access GitLab.
May I ask a few questions here? So when you do Terraform get, does it look for a specific file in your directory and says, okay, this is my file, or does it have a certain naming convention there that it assumes?
Yeah, it will read everything in the directory that has the TF extension, and it'll look for the module config like we had here, and it'll look for those and look for the source lines and download everything that is a source line. So if you have multiple things in there, it's going to fetch all the modules at the same time. And just every Terraform command is just by default will load everything .tf in that file. So when you look at the repository, you'll see that there's a GitLab.tf, a runner.tf, and a config.tf. So we can just keep everything separated out that way for organization, and just assume that Terraform will just read all of those.
Got it. Thank you. And can you go back to that slide? There's the port mapping there. There's like these. What is 8272491778? Where does that come from? Do you allow?
I believe that is I don't 100% know for sure. That might be like Google's internal ID, or no. Actually, at this point, it hasn't been created yet. So I honestly can't tell you for now. I can look that up afterwards and get back to you on that.
If I may, Ian, that is actually a unique identifier that's used for the firewall rule.
What?
Is it arbitrarily chosen, or are we just?
It's actually an auto-generated number.
Oh, okay. Terraform plan says it
That looks like
basically.
it can be computed, but in this particular case, what it's saying is I'm going to create this firewall rule. It'll end up with this ID. That'll be what it is.
Cool. Thanks. So, is Terraform, is its job? I mean, I can see that it's provisioning machines, but is it also trying to set up configuration files and run different services inside of it, or is that left for a different thing like Chef?
It does have some tie-in for provisioners, so it has providers and provisioners, and so after it's done providing everything, you can tell it use this provisioner. So currently, it's Chef provisioner only talks to Chef servers. You can't give it like here's a cookbook bundle to run against the instance or anything like that. But it does have the concept of provisioners, and if you delve deeper into, I probably should have included a slide for this, but in the module itself, we are using what's called a remote exec provisioner. And so that basically SSHs into the instance and runs commands. And we have it actually copying over a script and then running those commands using the remote exec provisioner.
And if
Cool.
I can jump in for just a second, I just realized that we're not actually defining the registry port. We'll have to add that.
Yeah. Okay, everybody good?
Can you expand a bit more about the state file you mentioned?
Okay, the state file it's kind of, sort of what it sounds like. It's a JSON file, just by default, it's a local file. It's a JSON file containing the current state of everything. So once you provision it, when it successfully creates that external IP address, it'll make sure there's an entry in the state file for that. You can also, it has the concept of a remote state file. I believe it uses console by default because it's another HashiCorp product. But that way, that's the recommended way. It's recommended to not store the state file in a Git repository because it changes a lot. But the console has been, I think you can use console or etcd or something similar to kind of store it. And then in the user's configuration, they can point to the remote state file. So then everybody who's using this can query against that. So that way, nobody's trying to provision the same infrastructure twice.
So if let's say I'm a user of GitLab module. Do I want to store this? And I'm also in the operations team, let's say. Do I want to store this somewhere? Like, where do I want to store this, and how do I share that state file?
If you're on a team who will need to be accessing this, the recommended way for the Terraform docs is to use a console instance. But you could also just store it on like an NFS mount, as long as it's in a point where I think you could even probably do it over HTTP somewhere if you have it shared over a web server.
Okay, that leads me to my final question regarding the state file. What do we recommend in our repository?
In the README file, we recommend following the Terraform documentation for setting up a remote repository. We don't express an opinion on the correct way to do it. We say, please, we refer to the Terraform documentation for their recommendations on how to handle it.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, so after you're happy with the plan, everything looks like it's supposed to do what it's supposed to do. You can also do a graph. I find it somewhat complicated. This is just a cutout of part of the graph because it is incredibly complicated, but it shows everything that Terraform wants to create and how they're all connected to each other. So if you want to see the full thing, there's the command you can use to generate it. It is somewhat interesting. It's not necessarily pleasing to the eye. We might want to look more into this and see if we can improve it at all. It uses GraphViz to kind of create the graph format. So we could probably improve it, but right now it is complicated, but it is interesting to look at and see how everything is related to each other.
How and so this uses basically Omnibus, right? I guess to provision. So you provision the virtual machine, and then you actually install Omnibus, or do you actually leverage like some kind of Google, it's kind of a virtual machine that we've already pre-baked?
We install Omnibus right now.
Okay.
It spins up the machine and then adds the repository and installs the Omnibus package and reconfigures.
Gotcha. And then so how much work would it be to translate this over to like Docker? at some point in the future?
It wouldn't be, I mean, so the original goal was to have multiple providers. So I think the next step was Amazon. Docker would not be complicated at all either. I mean, I think I did, as part of my learning Terraform, I did create a Docker, a quick Docker playbook to spin up a GitLab using Docker. So I could reclaim that and clean it up a bit in order to do that if we'd like. But Docker was pretty simple.
And by that you mean like, do you mean like provisioning like Docker Swarm, or do you mean like actually instead of using Omnibus, using the actual Docker images that we ship?
So that one I did was using the actual Docker images, but it was for your own Docker host. It wasn't for any upstream provision or anything.
Cool.
I did look into using the Docker image in Google Compute Image, and that was a little complicated. So we can revisit that later to see if there's a better way to do it. But at the time I was doing this, it was not a reasonable option. All right. So the next step, if you're happy with everything, is you run Terraform apply. And this is what goes through and creates everything for you. Depending on everything, it could take anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. It gives you a constant stream of updates, what it's waiting on, how long it's taken, how long it's been waiting on it, and then shows you when things successfully get created. And then at the end, it'll say apply complete. And everything should be ready to go at this point in time. Nothing too exciting in the output there, just standard information. After you're done, you can run Terraform output, and you have to specify the module if you're using a module. And this is a series of data points, in the module that we specified that we want people to be able to query, to be able to see. So this is, we want them to be able to see the IP address we created, the initial root password. If you don't specify one, we generate one for you. So we don't have these GitLab instances hanging out on the internet with no password at all. So this is just, everything we can. We can add more information to this. These are all defined by us as to what we want to see. And I think even the user can add their own outputs to their configuration if they want more information. I believe. I'm not 100% on that one. The next step is if you want to make a change. So for instance, initially we didn't create it with an SSL certificate, which is a bad idea. So we're not auto-creating the SSL certificate right now. I know probably Let's Encrypt integration down the road would be a win, I think, for us, but it's not there quite yet. So right now you create the certificate and the key. You add them to your personal configuration. And then if you run Terraform plan, it's going to show you. So before we were using the no SSL firewall ports, that was a gap in versions. So the previous slide did show 4.4.3, but after that I made that slide, we did add support for no SSL and SSL ports. So that was a gap in the slides. Sorry about that. So in this instance, it would be removing the no SSL list of ports that we have and adding the SSL list of ports. And so that's how you can kind of see that after you change things, it will show you, this is, we're getting rid of this, we're adding this, and it's not going to recreate the entire thing every single time.
Does it just know that it's no SSL, like that no SSL name? Does it come from the fact that you left out the SSL certificate?
So the red and green there, that's resources we define. So we defined the Google Compute Firewall. We have two resources. We have an external ports no SSL list we defined, and an external ports SSL list we defined. So that's something we gave a name to.
Oh, so you changed the name, you just didn't show it in this.
Right.
slide.
So something I wanted to talk about later was the sort of some of the hacks we have to do in the language. So one of the things we do is we use interpolation and count in order to enable and disable resources. So we have, if SSL certificate is defined, then we want to create one instance of external ports SSL and 0 instance of external ports no SSL. And if it's undefined, we flip that. So that's sort of the way you can conditionally include or exclude resources is by using the count and checking the, for variables being defined. And the final point I wanted to add was if you needed to add runners to this, you just add the variable runner count, and then Terraform from there will figure it all out and will automatically create, so I sent 2, so it's creating 2 instances starting at 0 as is appropriate. It'll handle naming them, making sure they have all the information you need, and we do pre-populate the runner token in there, so they should spin up and automatically start talking to your instance.
Should we have at least one runner be set up by default, perhaps?
We're defaulting to 0 right now. I mean, it's worth considering the switch. I'm not necessarily opposed to it. Does
If
anybody?
I could jump on that one. So we bolted runner on secondary. So we've added the runner behaviors in just the week before our last release, so just at the end of last week. The reason we decided to go with 0 out of the bat is in the event that somebody wants to spin up a GitLab but does not necessarily want to have runners actually attached to it, or doesn't want their runners to be a part of the same cluster or even inside of the GCE at all. The other thing that we've done is actually make it so that you can spin up just runners by providing the token and the host URL, which is why on the outputs you see runner host and runner token. Those were automatically generated if you tell it to spin up a runner but do not provide them ahead of time. But you can actually say, set a config value to true to disable GitLab and install just any number of runners that automatically register against your instance or your projects. So we intentionally went with 0 in the event that people just want GitLab, and then we can then turn around and have them turn on as many as they want. And because of how everything's stored in the state file, if they choose to add runners afterwards or to add more runners afterwards, they can just come in, change the runner count, and hit apply, and they'll now have whatever number of runners they said.
Is the reverse also true? Like if we defaulted to say 1, and that way we have sort of like the complete GitLab experience enabled for them out of the box, without them having to like make a tweak. But then they decide they don't want a runner, perhaps they can, of course, go in and do like runner count 0, right?
Yes, they could completely go the other route.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's something to consider. I think we'd like to have the provisioning stuff provision all of GitLab if we can, including CI, just as sort of an easy out of the box step. Yeah, we can take that up further, perhaps offline.
Yeah, I think in this particular case, because we actually already had the Terraform for GCE in place a month before we had the runners in place, if a user just pulls down and runs the update so that they get the new version of GitLab installed for them, we don't want to inadvertently, oh, hey, by the way, we added runners for you. Hope you like it.
I think we should definitely add the runner. And maybe we should create an issue to discuss this, but I think runner should be out of the box experience there.
Yeah, I'm not against it. That's just the reasoning behind it.
Yep, makes sense. I'll create an issue for this.
Okay. And so that's pretty much it. That's all it really takes in order to use, Terraform to get that. There are still some things we could do to improve this somewhat. One of the things which kind of still sits in my head, it may not actually be a big deal, is all it does right now is install the latest version of GitLab. There's no way to say install a specific version. I don't know how big of a deal that is, but I think it would be nice. But I also don't want to have to. I guess supposedly could be automated, but right now, it's tough to do. So we don't necessarily want to have to update the Terraform repository for every single GitLab release if there's no actual Terraform changes. So thinking about that, but when you specify the source in the module configuration, you can specify check out this tag, check out this branch. So that is something we can leverage, but we need to consider ways to do that. I think it would be a useful feature to add. As Jason pointed out, we do need to add the port for the registry, and we need to get Mattermost integration working is probably not working as well right now. So there is still some improvements to go. We're still in the early iteration of this, but I think Terraform is a useful product, and so I think we can make it do a lot of things for us. So I guess I'll take questions now.
Yes, I'm curious if we expand. Does it make sense to make Terraform work with setting up a GitLab Geo? If I have multiple instances in different zones and I want to connect them, is this the right application for it, or?
Yes, I think you could definitely do that. You could specify multiple GitLab instances. You can specify the zone and region to put them in, so you can. So it would be I think it would be a useful thing for spinning up a Geo instance. And
then if I want to so one of the things we do is we replicate the database. We have a bunch of commands we need to run on each of the servers. Is this again the right tool for that, or do we have to go look at something like Chef to pull in the different configurations and all that?
Well, this could definitely, this could spin up the instances and then hand it off to Chef. So this could get the initial spin up done and track everything for you. So I mean, this is a tool that you could definitely use to do that.
But you said, Ian, that we trigger a reconfigure after we do the deploy, right? So in theory, you could also trigger other commands.
Yeah, I mean, it is entirely up to you. You're not really limited. It is the remote exec we're using is just it SSHs in and runs a shell. And we have a copy of our shell script and run this, but it also has other, provisions. It can talk to Chef if you have a Chef server. There's a list of other different products you can use, and if none of them work, you can do your own thing. So yeah, this is definitely a tool that could be used to spin up a Geo instance and in a repeatable manner, basically.
That's super cool. Thanks.
Right, and because we have the full access and templating of the GitLab RB file. By default, at this point, it will automatically populate the initial runner token and initial root password. And we're looking I don't think we have, but we're looking at actually having it automatically populate the external URL, assuming that you provide the DNS name. So only the key things are automatically populated for you in any way. So if you want to go in and turn on Mattermost or turn it off and things like that, those are doable items. As we look into registry and Let's Encrypt and Mattermost itself, we'll have to look into the addition of making sure that the host names are exposed. If we're using a DNS zone, that we register those host names to the same IP address, things like that. So there's still some significant expansion to be done on the project.
Ian, another question I had. So how do I find out which version I'm installing? There's something you said. You said that it's installing the latest version by default right now. But
yes.
Does it print out the version while you're applying the plan?
It does not. That might be a good thing to add to the outputs to figure out the version that it installed. But it's not something you can. The information that Terraform has at hand. It might be tricky to get that as part of the plan, but we can definitely get it as part of the output.
Okay. And another thing is, how do I upgrade the instance I already provisioned with Terraform, for example?
So yeah, right now it's sort of taking somewhat of the immutable image approach, where if you want to upgrade, you destroy and create a new one. And so that's why we have the separate data partition. So that just will get detached from the old instance and attached to the new one. We can look into other paths, because that's not always, it would probably be about 5-10 minutes of downtime while you destroyed your instance and put a new one up. So we might want to consider other ways to do that. I haven't really thought that one through, but so the current approach is, the immutable image approach for destroy and recreate.
Okay. I'll create an issue for that as well. Like, at least we can document it and note what's expected to happen.
Sure, great.
Right, and right now, actually, there's no specific version in the Terraform itself when it comes to which version you're installing. It's actually just using the script.deb.sh to do the install, so it'll automatically give you whatever the latest version is.
And I noticed, at least for our production infrastructure, that Terraform, it loses access, right? I mean, once the instance is created, it joins Chef. Chef deletes the Terraform account. It has no way back in.
It uses your public key to So
Oh,
at
it
least,
does.
yeah, our module will use your public key in order to connect to it. So, I mean, if you take away, if you don't tell it where your public key is, then it doesn't know how to connect.
Okay, but it does create a Terraform account initially for itself. It doesn't use your public key when it creates the instance, or was that just a weird quirk? When I observed Danielle creating the staging network, I noticed it was creating a Terraform user with a password, and then Chef would come in and delete it.
It is not doing that on the instance. As soon as it actually the Google, we use the Ubuntu image for the default image, and that one actually does not allow root authentication at all over SSH. You have to go in as Ubuntu, and so we add our public key to the authorized keys for the Ubuntu for the default user on the instance, but Terraform itself does not create any accounts on the image at all. It uses your credentials to authenticate with everything.
Okay,
So-
it must have just been the way he was using it.
It could have been he was on Azure, correct?
On a what?
He was on
On Azure,
Azure.
yeah.
So it might have been something to do with the Azure images versus the Google images.
Right. For example, as Ian said, it was actually only at the beginning of May when Google decided, yeah, by the way, we're going to turn off root being able to SSH into any of your boxes, just so you know. Except they didn't really document when that occurred, and it actually bit me when I was working on PCF stuff. But with the Terraform key that we actually use, so you go into Google Cloud, you go into IAM, you generate a service key, you use that for your authentication. All the information is tied to that specific Terraform service account. And if you nuke that key from inside the project, which is very easy, it will no longer function.
And Azure doesn't let you log in as root either. It asks you for a username and a key, which in this case Terraform was using Terraform as the name of the user.
Right. I would have to triple check just to be dead sure, but I'm pretty sure there's not an additional one. You will end up with the Terraform key on your local system, and then you can dispose of it. Google actually...
It was actually a password it was using. It wasn't even a key, so I don't know what.
Yeah, no. Terraform makes use of the GCP connector bits, so it actually connects through the G Cloud and the CPI for that.
Any other questions? I can stop sharing.
I had one more. So production is actually using these Terraform scripts now?
They're using Terraform for their own infrastructure stuff. They're not using this particular module, but they're using it to spin up other things in Azure. I know also for the dev DO boxes, they're using Terraform as well. So if you need your own dev instance in DigitalOcean, you have to edit a GitLab repository and add a Terraform block for that. And then once that's done, Danielle had it set up so it will automatically merge it and apply it for you to get your dev instance. So they are using Terraform as well, just not our particular modules.
Okay, yeah. So not our official sort of Terraform scripts that we have for GCE.
Correct.
Okay.
Our scripts that Ian explained are for deploying GitLab, right? That's not what they are using Terraform for. And for example, we are using also Terraform in our pivotal infrastructure that Jason was working on. So we're also using Terraform in a different way, even within our team as well.
Okay, I don't see anything in chat. I guess one last chance for questions. Going once, going twice. All right. Thank you very much for listening, and feel free to ping me in Slack if you have any other questions or anything you want to talk about with this. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian.